The night I found out my daughter-in-law had forged my name, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table with a bank statement and a cup of coffee that had gone cold without me noticing. Reese was upstairs. Brennan was at his softball league. Avery, my 8-year-old granddaughter, was asleep down the hall with her nightlight on, and a picture book half open beside her pillow. The house was quiet in the way houses get when everyone inside believes they are safe. Reese believed she was safe. She had miscalculated. By the time she realized her mistake, the documents were already copied. The missing money already had a paper trail. A private investigator had already photographed her at the Phoenix airport twice, and a federal investigator had already reviewed enough to ask me when I wanted to proceed. I told him I needed 1 more week. I had a dinner I wanted to cook first. This is the story of how I spent 6 months pretending to be a broken old man while building the case that ended Reese's very careful life. My name is Calvin. I was 68 years old when this began. For 34 years, I ran a structural engineering firm in Cedar Rapids. I built bridges, designed load calculations, and spent my career making sure things did not collapse under pressure. The irony was not lost on me that the one collapse I failed to prevent was the quiet one happening inside my own son's house. But before I get to Reese, I have to start with Hannah. Hannah died in March, 11 weeks after the doctors first used the word pancreatic. 11 weeks. 41 years of marriage, and the disease left us 11 weeks to say what we needed to say and make peace with everything we could not finish. One afternoon, we were talking about whether the lilacs along the back fence might bloom early that spring. By the end of the season, I was standing beside her hospital bed, holding her hand while a monitor made a sound that the nurse confirmed was not a malfunction. I drove home in the dark. I sat in the driveway for a long time before I could make myself walk into the house. After the funeral, everything inside that house on Linden Street became a version of her. Her coffee mug on the 3rd shelf from the left. Her reading glasses still folded on the nightstand where she had set them down. The lilacs along the back fence she had planted herself 10 years ago, now opening in the warm May air without her there to see them. I would walk past that fence in the mornings and feel like the world had committed some enormous oversight by continuing to bloom. That was when Brennan came to me with the soft voice and the worried eyes. He is my only child. We have never been the kind of father and son who say everything, but we have always understood each other in the way that comes from decades of the same jokes, the same silence at certain moments, and the knowledge that neither of us would have turned out the way we did without Hannah holding us together. "Dad," he said one Sunday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table where I had barely eaten in weeks, "you can't stay here alone. This house is too big. Come live with us. Reese and I have plenty of room. Avery keeps asking for you." Reese was standing in the doorway when he said it. She smiled in the gentle, patient way that, at the time, I read as kindness. I wanted to believe it was love. I did believe it. Some part of me still does, if I am being honest, because Brennan had no idea what was growing beside him. So I sold the house on Linden Street where Hannah and I had raised our son and grown old together, and let the lilacs bloom every spring for 10 years. The buyers were a young couple. They liked the old maple in the front yard, the kitchen window where the morning light came in slow and gold, and the way the backyard felt enclosed and private. They did not know that every corner of that house had a memory standing in it. I did not tell them. After the mortgage cleared and the closing costs were paid, I walked away with $378,000. It was not a fortune. It was the accumulation of a life lived carefully, repaired when it broke, and never wasted on things that did not matter. Brennan and Reese were buying a 4-bedroom colonial in Marion. Reese kept referring to it as a fresh start, which I now understand was a phrase she directed at me. At the time, it sounded like optimism. I gave them $90,000 toward the down payment. I called it a contribution, a way of thanking them for opening their door. Brennan hugged me when I handed over the check. Reese kissed my cheek, and I remember thinking that she smelled like expensive perfume and something almost too careful. I should have listened to that instinct. But I was 68 years old, recently widowed, and standing in a kitchen that smelled like my grandchild's shampoo. I was not looking for reasons to be afraid. The new house was nice from the outside. White trim, a finished basement, a yard big enough for Avery to run through after school. Brennan seemed relieved to have me close. Avery climbed into my lap at night with picture books and asked me to read until she fell asleep, her small hands curled around my wrist. I told myself Hannah would have wanted this. I told myself family was the right answer to grief. I helped where I could. I fixed the garbage disposal when it jammed. I replaced the dishwasher gasket. I patched a crack in the chimney brick the home inspector had missed. On Tuesdays, I drove Avery to dance class because Reese said she had a client intensive. Twice a week, I cooked the meals Hannah used to make. Pot roast, chicken and dumplings, meatloaf with brown sugar worked into the glaze. For the first few months, nobody complained directly. Then Reese began with small comments delivered in a voice carefully shaped to sound like concern. "Calvin, you don't have to cook. We really try to eat clean here." Some older people feel displaced when they move in with family. "Have you thought about talking to someone?" She said these things with her head tilted and her eyes soft. She said them the way a person does when they have practiced being kind-sounding for so long that the performance has become automatic. I had spent 41 years inside real love. I knew the difference between family and someone slowly arranging furniture around you to shrink your sense of belonging. But here is what finally cut through the grief fog and made me pay attention. It was not one of Reese's comments. It was a bank statement forwarded from my old address on Linden Street. I had been letting mail pile up. Every envelope felt like another adult obligation Hannah was no longer there beside me to share. But one afternoon in June, I sat at the kitchen table and opened it without thinking much about it. At first, everything looked ordinary. Then I found the transfer. $6,400 had moved out of my checking account to a number I did not recognize. I read the line several times. The number did not change. I called the credit union. The woman on the phone was polite until she pulled up the record. Then her voice shifted, just slightly, the way voices do when a routine question has turned into something with weight. She said the transfer had been authorized in person. By me, on May 18th. I told her I had not been inside that branch on May 18th. I had not authorized anything. I had not signed a transfer slip or spoken to anyone at that branch in months. There was silence on the line. Then she asked if I had given anyone power of attorney over my accounts. I said no. Then she asked if anyone in my household had access to my documents. That question made something in my chest go cold and clear at the same time. After I hung up, I went upstairs to my room and pulled the lockbox from the back of the closet. It was the same small black metal box Hannah and I had kept for years, holding insurance papers, old tax documents, copies of our identification, and a checkbook I rarely used. I set it on the bed and opened it with hands I made stay steady. The checkbook from First Cedar Federal was gone. The folder containing copies of my driver's license and social security card was gone too. I stood in the middle of the room with the empty lockbox on the bed, and every small moment from the past few months began rearranging itself. The opened mail on the counter. The way Reese smiled whenever she noticed I had left a financial document on the desk. the times she offered to help me organize paperwork when I had not asked. The question about whether I had considered consolidating my accounts, because it would be simpler. 2 days later, the bank's fraud specialist called me back. The security footage showed a woman in her early 40s, dark hair, expensive bag. She had presented my identification and signed my name. I knew who it was before he finished describing her. But here is what I did not do. I did not walk downstairs and accuse Reese in front of my son. I did not put the bank statement on the table during dinner. I did not threaten her, confront her, or give her any sign that the quiet old man in the guest room had just become the most dangerous person in the house. I understood something clearly in that moment, the way I used to understand a calculation that had revealed a structural flaw. If Reese had stolen once, she had likely stolen before and might steal again. And if Brennan had signed whatever she put in front of him, the way she had said he would, then I did not yet know whether my son was careless or complicit. That was the question I could not yet answer. So I stopped reacting and I started collecting evidence. The next morning, I drove across town to a UPS store and rented a private mailbox under my own name. I filed a redirect with every financial institution I had, moving my statements away from Brennan and Reese's address. Then I drove to a diner near my attorney's office and called Phil Marquetti, who had handled my legal work for 20 years. We met for lunch the next afternoon. Phil ordered a Reuben. I ordered coffee and only drank half of it. I laid out everything. The transfer, the missing checkbook, the identification copies, the woman on the security footage. Phil listened without writing anything down. Then he set his sandwich aside and said, very quietly, "Calvin, this is not family trouble. This is a federal crime." He wanted to report immediately. I told him not yet. One stolen transfer told me Reese was guilty. It did not tell me whether my son had closed his eyes to the truth because he was weak or because he had decided not to look. I needed to know which one it was before I decided what to do next. Phil helped me open a new account at a bank in Iowa City, far enough from Marion that Reese would never pass it on an ordinary day. We moved my pension and Social Security deposits there. We changed every password. Then Phil recommended a small voice recorder, no larger than a pack of mints, with enough battery life to run for several days between charges. I began carrying it in my shirt pocket every time I moved through that house. What I heard over the following 6 weeks was more than I had expected. Reese had a brother named Cody. He lived in Phoenix. He supposedly ran some kind of online business. But from the conversations I overheard, the business seemed to be a drain Reese kept pouring money into. She had been sending him cash for almost a year. Twice, she had told Brennan she was going on wellness retreats. The investigator we later hired would confirm she had flown to Phoenix both times. But the recording that removed any remaining doubt about what kind of person I was living with came on a Saturday afternoon. Reese was in the laundry room, with the dryer running, phone to her ear, not aware that the old man she had dismissed could hear her from the hallway. "He's basically a vegetable since his wife died," she said. "He doesn't track anything. And Brennan signs whatever I put in front of him." I stood in the hall. The dryer hummed. I felt the last soft part of me turn into something harder and cleaner than anger. Anger burns out. What replaced it in me was patient and precise. I went back to the kitchen table. I poured a cup of coffee. I sat and I thought about Hannah, who used to tell me that the most dangerous thing you could do to an engineer was assume the load was lower than it actually was. I went back to Phil that week. I told him it was time to begin. Phil filed reports with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Because the transfers had crossed state lines and involved identity theft that implicated federal statutes. He also retained a private investigator named Darren Moswell, who spent the following weeks documenting Reese's trips to Phoenix, her financial connection to Cody, and the hidden account where at least some of my stolen money had been directed. The full picture that emerged was worse than the one transfer. Phil found a pattern of smaller withdrawals spread over several months, fake expense reimbursements, and 2 routed payments going through an Arizona account connected to Cody. Some signatures had been practiced based on the copied documents Reese had taken from my lockbox. The first theft had been a test. When nothing happened, she had continued. While all of this was being assembled, I kept playing the role Reese had assigned me. I let her call me sweetheart. I drank half of her green smoothies without complaint. I told Brennan the basement idea sounded thoughtful. When she walked me downstairs to show where the bed would go, I nodded like a man who had accepted that his opinions no longer mattered. The basement had a concrete smell, a single window that looked at the side of the air conditioning unit, and a sump pump that kicked on every 20 minutes through the night. That was not the living arrangement of a family that valued you. That was the living arrangement of a family managing you. But by then, I had also put earnest money on a small ranch house near Galveston, Texas, 10 minutes from the Gulf, with a wraparound porch and a fig tree leaning into the side yard like something that had survived its own weather and decided to keep growing anyway. Reese was planning to move me underground. I was planning to disappear entirely, but on my own terms. The dinner I chose was a Thursday in early August. I told Brennan I wanted to cook something special because 6 months had passed since Hannah left us, and I needed to mark the day the right way. He said that sounded good. Reese said, "Of course, Calvin," in the soft voice she used when she thought she was managing a situation. I made Hannah's pot roast with carrots, pearl onions, and rosemary. I baked a peach cobbler because Avery had loved it since she was old enough to hold a spoon. At 6:30, we sat around the table. For a few minutes, I let the room stay peaceful. Avery talked about something that had happened at school. Brennan refilled everyone's water. The cobbler cooled on the counter. Then I set down my fork. "I've made a decision about the basement," I said. Reese's face moved before she could stop it. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly, and she leaned forward with her hands folded, eyes already arranging themselves into something patient and warm. "Oh, Calvin," she said, "that's wonderful. We were hoping you'd feel ready." I looked at her, then at my son. "I'm not moving to the basement," I said. "I'm leaving this house. I bought a house in Texas. I close in 9 days. Brennan went still. Then I looked directly at Reese and said, "Now, why don't you tell Brennan about Phoenix?" The room shifted. Avery kept her spoon in her cobbler. Brennan's head moved slowly toward his wife. Reese did not move at all. "What trip to Phoenix?" Brennan asked. "May 17th and 18th, I said. "The same weekend $6,400 left my account." Reese's hand tightened around her napkin. "I don't know what he's talking about." I reached into my shirt pocket and set the flash drive on the table between the pot roast and the peach cobbler. It looked almost absurd sitting there, something so small holding that much damage. "Your wife has been stealing from me," I said to Brennan. "Not once, not by accident, repeatedly, with a plan." Reese stood fast enough to scrape her chair on the floor. "This is grief," she said, with the perfect amount of softness in her voice. "Brennan, your father has been alone in his pain for too long. He's creating a story because the real pain is too hard to face." Then she stepped around the table and reached for my shoulder. "Calvin," she said gently, "let's get you some water. You don't have to do this." I moved my shoulder away from her hand. "Do not touch me," I said. I looked at her and said, "Sit down." Something in my voice made her do it. Then I picked up my phone. The recording was already cued. The laundry room audio filled the kitchen, the dryer humming underneath. Reese's voice sharp and clear. He's basically a vegetable since his wife died. He doesn't track anything, and Brennan signs whatever I put in front of him. Avery went very still across the table, her spoon halfway to her mouth, watching the adults with the quiet attention children use when they sense something important is happening that no one will explain to them directly. Brennan's face emptied out. Not rage, not grief, something further down than both of those. The expression of a man who has just understood that a part of his life he believed in was never real. Reese recovered faster than I expected. First, the tears came, hands pressed to her mouth, head shaking. "That was taken out of context," she said. "Brennan, you know me. You know I would never." Brennan did not respond, so she tried the other direction. The crying stopped. Her face solidified. "Your father is not well," she said calmly now. "He lost his wife and it has affected his mental clarity. This is documented. His doctor could confirm it." I let her talk. That was one of the hardest things I have ever done in my life. Every word she said landed on something real and raw because some of it was true. I had not been well. I had been grieving. I had been confused and slow and full of a sorrow I did not know how to carry. She was using the truest parts of my pain as a weapon, and I had to sit with that without moving. When she stopped, I said, "There are 9 more recordings." Her eyes dropped to the flash drive. "There are bank statements showing the transfers," I said. "There is surveillance footage from the credit union showing a woman who matches your description, using my identification. There is a private investigator's report documenting 2 trips to Phoenix. And there is a federal investigator who has been reviewing this case for several weeks." The kitchen was completely quiet. Then I looked at Brennan. "I did not come here tonight to argue," I said. "I came here to end it." On Tuesday morning, federal agents arrested Reese outside the house. Not in a dramatic moment. Just a woman with a yoga mat under her arm and sunglasses pushed into her hair, and then 2 agents with badges and paperwork standing at the end of the driveway. She was charged with wire fraud, identity theft across state lines, and forgery. Cody was picked up in Phoenix the same day. The investigator told me afterward that I had not been their first target. Reese and Cody had been running careful, incremental schemes for years, almost always against elderly relatives connected to men. Reese was involved with. They had learned to keep each theft small enough to avoid attention. They had counted on shame and confusion to keep their targets quiet. They had never run into someone who spent their career finding the exact point where a structure was most likely to fail. Brennan filed for divorce before the week was out. He moved into an apartment with 2 bags and a face that looked 10 years older than it had at the dinner table. Without Reese's income, and with my attorney challenging the $90,000 contribution as a transaction made under manipulated circumstances, Brennan could not sustain the mortgage on the house in Marion. He listed it in September. He sold at a loss. Reese took a plea agreement to avoid trial. She received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay $41,000 in restitution. She would serve her sentence in a minimum security facility in Illinois. Cody received a suspended sentence with probation and community service. I may never recover most of the money she took, but money had stopped being the point a long time before the verdict. 9 days after that dinner, I drove to Texas and closed on the house near Galveston. It was small and 1 story and did not resemble in any way the house on Linden Street where Hannah and I had grown old together. There was no formal dining room, no staircase, no room that held the particular quality of morning light she used to stand in with her coffee. What it had was a wraparound porch, a fig tree in the side yard that leaned slightly like it had decided a long time ago that straight was overrated, and 10 minutes between me and the Gulf. The first night I slept there, the house was quiet in a way that felt different from every other quiet I had lived inside since Hannah died. The silence in Cedar Rapids had been full of absence. The silence in Marion had been full of surveillance. This silence was just clean. I sat on the porch the next morning with coffee and watched the light come across the grass. I could hear something that might have been gulls. The fig tree moved slightly, in a wind I could not quite feel from where I was sitting. I thought about Hannah. I thought about every trip to the coast we had postponed, because there was always one more responsible reason to wait. I thought about the retirement we had planned and never gotten to. I bought that house for both of us. Not long after I settled in, I started driving to the water in the mornings. There is a stretch of shoreline near San Luis Pass where pelicans gather and dive like they have forgotten how far they have to fall before the water comes up to meet them. I would stand at the railing and watch them. And sometimes it seemed to me that there was something clarifying about watching a large, ungainly bird throw itself into the air with complete commitment. Hannah would have laughed at the comparison. She would have made something out of it, some small observation that turned it into something worth keeping. She had that gift. I never did, entirely. But I was learning. Brennan and I did not speak for almost 3 months after the arrest. I told myself silence was easier. I told myself I needed distance. Both of those things were true. But I also spent a lot of evenings on that porch wondering which would hurt more, hearing his apology or hearing the explanation that was not quite an apology. Then one Sunday in November, my phone rang. He said my name, then nothing. I sat with that for a few seconds. Then he said, "Dad, I didn't know." I looked at the water. The pelicans were out, working the same stretch they always worked, indifferent to everything except the next dive. "I know you didn't," I said. His breath caught. "I should have known." "Yes," I said, "you should have." That silence was the first honest thing we had shared in months. He told me Avery missed me. I told him I missed her too. I said she was welcome to visit in March, and I would pick her up at Houston Hobby. Then he asked quietly if he could come too. I thought about the dinner table, the recording, the way his face had emptied when the truth finally reached him. "Yes," I said, "you can come too." They arrived on a Thursday morning in early spring. Avery came through the arrival's gate at a run, which she had done since she was old enough to walk fast, and she hit me around the waist and held on like I was something that might disappear. I held her tighter than I meant to. Brennan stood a few feet back with both their bags. He was thinner. The circles under his eyes said he had not been sleeping the way he should. He looked like a man who had been sitting with something heavy for several months, which was, of course, exactly what he was. We spent 4 days doing simple things. We grilled redfish on the back deck. Avery dug for sand crabs at the beach and carried her shells home in her pockets and arranged them on the porch railing like they were exhibits in a museum only she curated. Brennan slept 12 hours the first night. I did not comment on it. Sometimes exhaustion is its own kind of confession. On their last morning, he sat beside me on the porch with his coffee barely touched. "I don't know how to make it up to you," he said. I watched Avery in the hammock, a picture book open on her chest, one sandal hanging off the end of her foot. "You don't make it up to me," I said. "You make it up to her. Raise her so she never looks at a grieving person and thinks about what she can take." He was quiet for a while, then he nodded. He did not argue, which was, I think, the most honest response he could have given. I want to say one thing directly to anyone listening who is near my age, or who has lost someone, or who has ever let grief convince them that being confused was the same as being safe. After Hannah died, I stopped opening envelopes. I let other people sound certain when I felt uncertain. I let Reese decide what version of me was real, and for several months I accepted that version because fighting through the pain felt like more effort than I had available. That was my mistake. Not the grief, not needing help, not moving in with my son when the house on Linden Street became more silence than I could stand. Those things were human. The mistake was forgetting that my life still belonged to me. So read your bank statements. Keep your documents somewhere only you control. Sign nothing, because someone is moving fast and making it sound simple. Keep one person outside, the immediate family, who will tell you the uncomfortable truth without softening it until it loses its shape. Never let anyone convince you that being older or tired or recently broken by loss means your seat at the table is smaller. I think about Reese sometimes. Not with the kind of anger that once felt like it might never cool. More with the flat, factual clarity of someone who has studied a structure and identified exactly where it was weak. She was patient. She was practiced. She had probably done this before and would have done it again if no one had made it costly. She made one error that most of her targets would never have caught and pressed. She chose a grieving man and assumed the grief had replaced the engineer. It had not. I also think about Brennan. He is still my son. He made choices I will carry with me for years, even if those choices were more about what he refused to see than what he deliberately did. There is a kind of betrayal in convenience, in choosing the easier explanation, because the harder one requires a sacrifice you are not ready to make. But Brennan is learning. He is slower to agree now, more careful with his questions. That is a version of him I can work with. He is seeing someone new. Her name is Patty. She teaches kindergarten. She laughs easily and does not perform kindness. It is simply where she operates from. I told Brennan to take his time. A man who has mistaken calculation for love should learn to recognize the real thing before he makes another promise. The fig tree gave me so much fruit last August that I spent 3 mornings filling baskets and taking them to neighbors. A widow down the road named Marina makes them into preserves. We sit on her porch sometimes in the early evening, when the light goes gold across the grass, and talk about the people we have loved, and the lives that did not turn out the way we planned. She makes the best coffee I have had since Hannah. I do not tell her that because some comparisons are private, but I think about it every time. Avery visits 4 times a year now. She still runs to me first when she comes through the door, and every time she does, something that Reese tried to take from me comes back a little more complete. This past spring, she helped me plant a row of gardenias along the porch railing. She asked me if the person I was always thinking about would have liked them. I told her yes. She thought about that for a moment and then said, with the straightforward confidence of a 9-year-old, "Then she can still smell them." I did not know what to do with that, so I just kept planting. I am 69 years old now. The fig tree is doing well. The gardenias are holding. The pelicans still dive past the railing every morning like the water owes them something, and every morning they come back up with what they were looking for. Hannah would have loved this view. I miss her every day. But I am not waiting to disappear. I am not fading in a corner somewhere. And if someone ever looks at a quiet old man and decides that quietness is the same thing as absence, I hope this story reaches them before they make the mistake Reese made. Quiet is not finished. It is just patient. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. Would you have confronted Reese the night you found the bank statement, or would you have waited the way Calvin did? Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, patience, and the kind of justice that arrives exactly when it should.